Normally, most human beings, when they use their eyes or their ears, are constantly and chronically straining to see and to hear. And when you come to think of it, that's very odd, because our eyes don't work by effort. They don't have to go out and get the light. The light comes to them. And in the same way, sound comes to our ears. And even the sense of touch comes to our fingertips. We don't, for example, have to press a thing hard. If I want in the dark, I'm trying to fumble and feel what this is. I don't have to press very hard to feel it, because the sensation simply of the hard object comes to the nerve ends in my skin. And so it's strange, isn't it, that we have acquired the habit of a constant and chronic effort to see clearly and to hear clearly. I think part of it comes from school. You know, when children are listening to a teacher in class, they're always fidgeting or doing something like this, you know, and looking around and twisting and jiggling. And the teacher says, "Pay attention!" And the children immediately, to ingratiate the teacher, are able to sort of ham or act what paying attention is like. And paying attention, of course, is staring at the teacher up and down. Yes, they're very interested in what you say. And sometimes, to get their concentration clear, they curl up their legs around the legs of the chair and go into all these strained attitudes so that the teacher knows they really are trying very hard to attend. And it is through such conditioning as that, through being taught that we must try to see and try to hear in order to have clear sight and clear hearing, that we learn constantly to strain our senses in their use. But as a matter of fact, this impedes the clarity of our senses, because if you will try staring hard at a book in front of you, or staring very hard at the TV screen you're looking at right now, you'll find that it becomes fuzzy. Also, in the same way, if you're trying to listen, say, to a telephone conversation while the children are running all over the house and screaming, if you try to listen to the telephone, you'll get very angry and you'll have to stop to yell at the children to make them be quiet. But on the other hand, if you just let the sound come to your ears, you'll have no difficulty at all in hearing it. I don't think it's only that we have been taught by teachers and parents and so on to try to see and try to hear clearly. There are other factors in the problem. And one of them is that while we are seeing and hearing, we are trying to make sense of our world by thinking about it. And the act of thinking also introduces an element of strain into the use of our minds. And I think the reason for this is, perhaps you will remember how I showed you on a previous program, that thought is linear. You know, it goes one word after another. It's strung out in a line. We think thought, 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 thought in a line like this, one after another. Whereas when we see to what is going on entirely. We take in a volume when we see. We take in a great area. Nature is a volume rather than something strung out in a line. But when we think, we get one thought after another, and so the process of thought is much slower than the process of seeing and using our consciousness or our mind as a whole. And this then requires a certain effort to make thought keep up with what we are seeing or what we are hearing. Also, you see, thought works by abstraction. Thought, as I said, is slower because it goes in a line, thought after thought. And also, thought is abstract. That is to say, it lacks the full living quality of real life, just as this figure here is just a sort of skeleton, a ball on top of sticks, and therefore it lacks the vitality, the aliveness of a real man. Now, the more we tend to live in a world of thought, the more we tend to live in an abstract world that is removed from and has a gap between it and the real world of nature. And as a result of this, we tend to live in a world that is in some ways unsatisfying, lacking in vitality and life. And also, people tend to think all the time. This becomes, for every civilized community, every civilized person, a sort of habit, which is like constantly talking to yourself. Now, of course, when you meet me here on the TV screen, I'm always talking, or almost always. But I assure you, I'm not always talking. I'm often silent, because after all, we have to be silent some of the time, don't we, in order to hear what other people have to say, and therefore to have something to talk about. In just the same way, our minds have to be silent some of the time if we are really to have anything to think about except thoughts. You know, there is a popular proverb which says that talking to yourself is the first sign of madness. And there's some truth in this, because constant thinking, as distinct from simply experiencing through our senses, constant thinking about our experiences, coding our experiences into words, into signs, into the symbols of thought, is a buzz that goes on day in and day out inside our heads, except when we are sleeping. And as a result of that, we begin to live in a world increasingly divorced from reality. And that is why in those Oriental cultures in India and China and Japan, it has always been considered important for everybody to spend some of his time, by no means all of his time, but some of it, not thinking, but simply in the attitude which was represented by that Chinese character which I drew at the beginning, pronounced guan, or quiet observation. This is not saying that thinking is a disturbance, is a thing that human beings shouldn't do. On the contrary, it's a highly important acquisition of man. But thinking is of no real value to us unless we also can practice non-thinking, unless we can have our minds silent and make immediate contact with the real world as distinct from the world of pure abstraction. And so this leads to a very common practice in Asia, among Hindus, among Buddhists, among Taoists, called meditation. And I want to try and show you something about it. By sitting in the posture of meditation, which is commonly used, and is done approximately like this. One sits upon a firm cushion. Usually, a big city telephone directory is about the right thickness. And ordinarily, among Oriental peoples, they sit in what is called lotus posture, or half lotus posture, as I'm sitting now, which means that the right foot is lifted up onto the left thigh. You will find, of course, that that's an extraordinarily uncomfortable position if you're not used to it. But one of the reasons for sitting that way is that it locks your legs together so that you don't easily fall over if you should go to sleep. And also that this position gives you a sense of being very, very firmly rooted to the ground.